Where do I even start? I guess the beginning of the end came with the fights, those endless arguments about money. I mean, who doesn't argue about finances, right? But with Olivia, it was never just about making ends meet. It was like she had this endless craving for more, far more than I could ever provide. We weren't broke by any means, but we weren't rolling in money either. My job's nothing glamorous, but it's steady and it used to cover everything just fine. At least I thought it did. Olivia, though, she had these big, flashy dreams. You know, the kind of life they show on those over-the-top reality TV shows. Fancy dinners, high-end designer clothes, the works. Back when we first got together, she wasn't like that at all. She was grounded, fun, easy to talk to. But over time, it was like she transformed into someone I barely recognized. Someone who didn't even seem interested in hearing me out anymore. The fight started small. Complaints about why we couldn't afford a vacation or why we were still driving the same beat-up car. But then they escalated. There were nights when she wouldn't say a word to me, and when she did, it was just anger, like I'd failed her somehow. I started feeling like I could never measure up to whatever standard she was chasing. Then one day the arguing just stopped. At first, I thought it was a good sign, like maybe we were finally turning a corner. But something felt off. Olivia wasn't nagging about money anymore, but suddenly she was coming home with things we absolutely couldn't afford. The first red flag was this fancy designer handbag. I didn't even know the brand, but I could tell it wasn't cheap. When I asked her about it, she just waved me off, saying it was on sale. A real bargain, she claimed. It didn't sit right with me, but I let it go. I was so exhausted from the constant tension that I couldn't stomach another fight. But then more stuff started appearing, jewelry, gadgets, things way out of our budget. Every time I asked, she had some excuse, sales, discounts, knockoffs, whatever. I tried to believe her, to convince myself I was overthinking. But deep down, I knew something wasn't adding up. We stopped talking about money completely, as if it was this taboo topic neither of us dared to bring up. But something was gnawing at me. I'd catch her glued to her phone, smiling at texts I wasn't part of. When I'd ask who it was, she'd shrug it off with a casual, "Oh, just Emma," or "a friend from work." It was like she didn't even care enough to make her lies believable. She'd turn away while texting, or her voice would change when she answered certain calls. I told myself not to make a big deal out of it, chalking it up to my own paranoia. After all, our relationship wasn't terrible. It just wasn't good anymore. You know how you tell yourself everything's fine just to avoid facing the truth? That was me, desperately clinging to the idea that we were okay. At work, things were as dull and predictable as ever. During lunch, the guys would swap stories about their marriages. Jack from accounting once complained about his wife blowing their credit card on some high-end blender, and everyone laughed in solidarity. Money troubles, it was the universal struggle. But as they shared their gripes, I found myself staying quiet. Not because I couldn't relate, but because I didn't want to admit just how bad things had gotten at home. The more distant Olivia became, the harder I worked to convince myself I was imagining it. One day, Jack mentioned he and his wife were seeing a therapist to work through their financial issues. That hit me like a gut punch. I knew, deep down, that I should have been doing the same, talking to someone, anyone. But instead, I just smiled and nodded, pretending everything was fine. Looking back now, I see how blind I was. I didn't want to admit the truth even to myself. Olivia grew colder with every passing day. It wasn't just the expensive stuff or her secrecy with the phone. It was her whole demeanor. She was always distracted, like she wasn't even in the room when we were together. Our conversations became hollow, just surface-level small talk. I'd ask her about her day, and she'd mumble some half-hearted response, as if she couldn't be bothered to engage. And intimacy? Forget it. She barely even looked at me, let alone touched me. I tried to get close one night, thinking maybe we just needed some connection. But when she pulled away, saying she was tired, it wasn't just the words. It was the way she said it. No warmth, no affection, just ice. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just tired. She was done. Done with me, not with life. Oh no. She seemed to have endless energy when it came to her friends and her nights out. I'd sit there, watching her get all dolled up like she was heading to some exclusive club, while I slouched on the couch in my worn-out jeans and hoodie, wondering what happened to the woman I married. And the worst part? I ignored it. I kept convincing myself it was just a rough patch. Maybe work was stressing her out, or she was dealing with something I didn't understand. I even started blaming myself. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe I wasn't making her feel loved or appreciated. So I tried harder. I pitched in more around the house, planned little date nights. Not extravagant ones, because let's be real, we couldn't afford that. But no matter what I did, it was like trying to fill a bottomless pit. Nothing was ever good enough. Then one day, she walked in with a brand new phone, shiny and top of the line. Something I knew we had no business buying. I tried to lighten the mood, half joking, "What? Did you rob a bank or something?" She just laughed it off and said, "It was a great deal." That laugh, that casual brush off. That's when it hit me hard. Something was seriously wrong. That was the moment I couldn't keep lying to myself anymore. I started paying closer attention to everything. Her phone, the way she dressed, how she carried herself. It was like looking at a stranger. She wasn't the woman I fell in love with. She was someone else entirely, and I didn't know why. But I was determined to figure it out. You know that gut feeling? Like a whisper in the back of your mind that something's not adding up? And the more you try to ignore it, the louder it gets? That was me day in and day out. A few weeks after I stopped pretending everything was fine, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously off. The expensive stuff, the secrecy, her whole demeanor. It all felt wrong. But I didn't have any real proof, just this nagging suspicion. And then one Saturday morning, the moment came, the one I couldn't ignore. Olivia told me she was meeting Emma, her close friend, for coffee. Innocent enough, right? I didn't want to be the kind of husband who's always suspicious. But there was this restlessness inside me, this itch I couldn't scratch. Ever since she brought home that designer bag a few weeks back, something had been gnawing at me. She said it was a knockoff from a sale, but the more I thought about it, the less sense it made. I don't know much about high-end fashion, but even I could tell that bag wasn't cheap. It looked real, too real for someone who constantly reminded me how tight money was. I sat on the couch, staring at that bag, turning it over in my mind. I tried to push the thoughts away, but they wouldn't go. Eventually, I picked it up, examining it like I could find answers hidden in the stitching. Out of desperation, I did a little online research, looking up ways to tell if a designer bag was authentic. I checked the stitching, the logo, even the zipper, every little detail. And then it hit me. This wasn't a knockoff. It was the real deal. A genuine designer bag worth more than we had in our entire savings account. My stomach dropped. We couldn't afford this. Heck, we couldn't afford half the stuff she'd been flaunting lately. She'd lied to me, flat out lied. And for what? I couldn't understand it, but I knew something was seriously wrong. I grabbed my phone and tried calling her. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it. The line rang and rang, but she didn't answer. I tried again. Nothing. Panic started creeping in, that suffocating kind of worry that makes you feel like you can't breathe. Desperate, I called Emma. I didn't even know what I was expecting, but I needed to hear something that made sense. Emma answered, casual as ever. "Hey Ethan, what's up?" I tried to keep my voice steady. "Just checking. Are you and Olivia still having coffee?" There was a pause, a long, gut-wrenching silence. "Coffee?" Emma said, sounding genuinely confused. "I'm at home. I wasn't meeting Olivia today." Her words hit me like a punch to the chest. I gripped the phone so tight it felt like I might crush it. "Oh, must have been a mix-up," I mumbled before hanging up. I sat there, stunned, staring at that stupid bag, my mind racing. Where the hell was Olivia? Why would she lie about something so simple? A sick feeling settled in my stomach, this heavy, twisting knot of anger and betrayal. I didn't want to believe the worst, but deep down I already knew. This wasn't just about money anymore. I couldn't confront her yet, not without more evidence. I needed something solid before I made any accusations. I couldn't just charge in blind. So I decided to play it cool. Or at least as cool as I could manage. I had to gather more information, no matter how much it ate me up inside. I needed to know the truth, even if it broke me in the process. I was a wreck. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, praying it was her. But when she finally came home, it was late, too late. She barely even looked at me. She just dropped her bag on the couch and mumbled something about being exhausted. No explanation for where she had been all day, no excuse. I didn't press her, not yet. I wasn't ready for that. I just nodded like the fool I was, letting her slip off to bed without saying a word. But inside, my mind was racing. I couldn't stop thinking about the way things used to be. Back when we first got married, I trusted her completely. We didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough, or at least that's what I thought. Now, all I could do was reflect on how much had changed. I still remember our wedding day like it was yesterday. Olivia looked like a dream. I swear, I felt like the luckiest guy on earth. She made me believe we could take on the world. Back then, we didn't care about money. We barely scraped by, but we were happy. Or at least I was. I've started wondering now, was she? Or was this hidden side of her always there, just waiting for the right time to show itself? Those memories made everything hurt even more. I loved her. I trusted her. But now, I didn't know what to think. Every little thing she did seemed off. That night, as I lay next to her, sleep wouldn't come. My mind kept replaying everything, the lies, the excuses, the expensive things she kept bringing home. Was this really the woman I married? Or had she been hiding this version of herself from me all along? The next morning, she came home with yet another new phone. Sleek, shiny, and definitely something we couldn't afford. I stared at it like it was the final piece of the puzzle, proof that I wasn't crazy. She noticed me staring and just shrugged. "Got it on a great deal," she said, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My brain was screaming at me to confront her, to demand answers, but I held back. I wasn't ready for that conversation. Not yet. I needed more. I needed to be sure. So, I decided to keep watching, to track where she was going and who she was seeing. The old me would never have done this. I never would have snooped or doubted her like this. But I wasn't the same guy anymore. She turned me into this. All my trust had been replaced by this gnawing feeling I couldn't shake. I didn't know how far I was willing to go to get the truth, but I knew I couldn't stop now. The lies, the secrecy. It was all piling up, and I knew it was only a matter of time before it all came crashing down. The thought of confronting her made my stomach twist. But what choice did I have? If I was going to catch her, I had to be smart. I had to be patient. But every day that passed, the doubt kept growing. The more I uncovered, the less I recognized the woman I thought I knew. Here I was spiraling. The lies, the strange behavior, the expensive stuff. It was all adding up, and I couldn't ignore the feeling that there was something huge I was missing. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but let's face it. Everything was pointing to one thing. Olivia was hiding something from me. The problem was, I didn't have any real proof. Just this gut feeling gnawing away at me. It was late one night when I finally made up my mind. I had to check her phone. We were in bed, and she was already fast asleep, her phone lying there on the nightstand next to me. I felt like the lowest kind of person even considering it, but what other choice did I have? She'd lied to me more times than I could count. The whole thing with Emma not meeting her for coffee had been eating at me for days. I needed to know. I slowly reached over, my hand trembling, and grabbed her phone. As soon as the screen lit up, my heart nearly stopped. The passcode was different. Definitely not the one I knew. Just like that, the password had changed. My stomach dropped. Why would she do that? There was only one reason, right? To keep me out. I set the phone down quickly, trying to hide how frustrated I was. If I confronted her now, she'd have some excuse ready. She always did. So instead, I decided to be smart about it. As much as I hated the idea of waiting, I was going to follow her. I needed to see where she was really going, who she was meeting. The old me would never have done this. But that guy was long gone. She'd made me this way. All the trust was gone. So I waited, watched, and I knew that sooner or later, I'd find the answers I was looking for. I finally got my chance. Olivia told me she was heading off to work, just like she always did. But something about the way she said it felt off. Too casual, too quick. I don't know why, but it didn't sit right with me. So, instead of heading to my own job, I stayed behind and waited. I kept my distance, making sure she wouldn't see me. Normally, she'd head left toward the bus stop, but not today. Today, she turned right, heading toward a taxi stand. That's when my heart started pounding. Something was definitely wrong. She didn't even glance in the direction of her office. I ducked behind a tree, watching as she got into a cab. My pulse was thudding in my ears. My mind was racing, and I realized I had two choices. I could let it go and pretend I hadn't seen anything, or I could follow her and get to the bottom of it. I'm not sure why I hesitated, but it felt like everything in our marriage hinged on what I did next. I hailed the nearest cab, my voice shaky as I told the driver, "Follow that taxi." He gave me a funny look but shrugged and pulled out onto the road. My heart was still pounding, and my hands were clenched as I watched Olivia's cab ahead of us. My mind was spinning. Where was she going? What was she up to? And why the hell was she lying about it? Was she seeing someone else? Was she meeting some guy? Or was I just losing my mind? The cab followed her through streets I didn't even recognize, winding its way through the city. After what felt like hours, but was probably just 10 minutes, her taxi finally stopped in front of a building I didn't recognize at all. It was a rundown office building, nothing special. The kind of place you'd walk by without giving it a second thought. My chest tightened as I watched Olivia step out of the cab and head toward the entrance. She didn't hesitate, didn't look around. It was like she had been there 100 times before. The cab driver glanced at me through the rearview mirror. "You want me to stop here?" "Yeah," I muttered, barely able to get the words out. I threw a few bills at him, got out, and kept my distance as Olivia disappeared inside. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to follow, staying far enough behind so she wouldn't notice me. I crossed the street, trying to keep my cool, but my mind was racing. What the hell was going on? What was she doing here? Then, like some cruel twist of fate, I saw him, Michael, her boss. He walked up to the building with the kind of confidence that made my stomach drop. I've never liked the guy, but I sure as hell didn't expect to see him here. Watching him walk into that building, following Olivia inside, made my stomach twist in ways I didn't think were possible. I wanted to storm in there, confront them both, but I couldn't. I needed more. I needed to be absolutely sure. So I waited. I stood there like an idiot, hoping for some kind of explanation, something that wouldn't make me want to throw up. But deep down, I already knew the worst. I stayed as long as I could, watching, hoping neither of them would come out. My head was spinning, and my heart was pounding. When I finally turned to leave, I felt sick. It was like everything I thought I knew about my life had just slipped away. But I wasn't done yet. I still needed more proof before I made my move. A few days later, I ran into one of Olivia's old coworkers, Sarah, at the grocery store. I didn't plan on asking about Olivia, but somehow, it just slipped out. "Hey, how's work going for Olivia? Haven't seen much of her lately." Sarah looked at me, confused. "Olivia? She hasn't worked there for months." My blood ran cold. My stomach dropped. "She hasn't worked there for months?" I could barely speak. I forced myself to mumble something lame like, "Oh, right, must have slipped my mind." But inside, I was screaming. Months. She'd been lying about work for months. I left the store in a daze, trying to wrap my head around it. What the hell had she been doing all this time if she wasn't at work? Where was she going? What the hell was going on? It all started to click into place, the designer bags, the expensive stuff, the secret meetings. Olivia had been living a double life, and I'd been too blind to see it. I walked around aimlessly afterward, trying to clear my head. Everywhere I looked, I saw couples. People holding hands, laughing, going about their day like everything was fine. And all I could think about was how isolated I felt, how completely alone I was in this mess. I wanted to scream. I wanted to confront her right then and there, but I couldn't. Not yet. I still needed more. The lies had been building up for months, maybe even years, and I was only just starting to uncover the truth. I didn't want to believe it, but there was no denying it anymore. Olivia wasn't just hiding things from me. She was hiding everything. She was living an entirely different life right under my nose, and now I was determined to figure out exactly what that life looked like, even if it destroyed everything. After everything I'd seen, I couldn't shake the suspicion that Michael was at the center of it all. He wasn't just her boss anymore, he was something more. And if he was involved, maybe his wife, Lily, was just as in the dark as I was. A few clicks on social media confirmed it. There she was, smiling in photo after photo with Michael, looking like they had the perfect life. It made me sick to think she probably had no clue that her world, like mine, was built on a lie. I hesitated before sending her a message. What was I even supposed to say? Hey, I think your husband is sleeping with my wife? Felt absurd, but I was desperate for answers. I had to know the truth. So I kept it simple, vague but blunt. Hey, I need to talk. It's about Michael and Olivia. Please. When the message sent, my stomach twisted into knots. I had no idea where this would lead, but I was past the point of turning back now. I needed to know. I didn't expect a response right away, but it came the next evening. Can you meet tomorrow? It read. Sure. I replied quickly, though my heart was pounding in my chest. What could I possibly say? How could I even begin to ask her about something so insane? But I had to meet her. I had to know what was really going on. It all started with the fights. The usual stuff, arguments about money. Everyone fights about finances, right? But with Olivia, it wasn't just about not having enough. It was like she always wanted more. Way more than I could give. We weren't starving, but we weren't exactly rolling in cash either. I have a regular job, nothing glamorous, but it keeps the lights on. Or at least it did. Olivia, though, had these grand dreams, like something straight out of a reality show. Expensive dinners, designer handbags, luxury everything. It wasn't like that when we first met. Back then, she was more grounded. We had fun. But over time, she started changing into someone I barely recognized. Someone I couldn't even talk to anymore. At first, the fights were small. Complaints about why I couldn't take her on vacation or why we were still driving our old car. But then they grew bigger. There were nights when we didn't speak at all. And when we did, she was angry like I'd done something wrong. It started to feel like I wasn't enough for her. Then one day it all just stopped. The arguments faded, and at first I thought it was a good thing, maybe things were finally improving. But something didn't sit right. Olivia wasn't bringing up money anymore, but suddenly she was coming home with things we couldn't afford. The first was a designer handbag. I didn't recognize the brand, but I knew it was expensive. I asked her about it, and she brushed it off like it was nothing. It was on sale, practically a bargain. But I could tell something wasn't right. I didn't press it though. I was tired. Tired of the constant bickering. Tired of the tension. But then came more jewelry, gadgets, new clothes. Things we didn't need and definitely couldn't afford. Every time I asked about it, she had an excuse, sales, knockoffs, you name it. I tried to tell myself I was overreacting. Maybe she had found some amazing deals. But deep down, I knew. I knew something was off. We stopped talking about money altogether. It was like we just stopped acknowledging it. But that gut feeling never went away. I kept noticing things. Little things like how she'd smile at her phone or turn it away when I walked in the room. When I asked who she was texting, she'd just say, "Oh, just Emma," or "just a friend from work." It felt dismissive, like she was treating me like I was an idiot. At first, it was subtle, how she would look at her phone when I wasn't around, or the way her voice would change when certain calls came in. I tried not to make a big deal of it. Maybe I was just paranoid. After all, our relationship wasn't terrible, right? It was just different. But looking back, I was so blind. Work was the same, boring but reliable. I wasn't the type to complain, but sometimes at lunch, my buddies and I would talk about our marriages. Jack from accounting would joke about how his wife maxed out their credit card on some ridiculous appliance, and everyone would laugh, nodding in shared understanding. There was always someone who had a story about money troubles, tight budgets, expensive wants, that kind of thing. It was relatable. At least it was for me. But as they shared their stories, I found myself saying less and less. Not because I didn't have anything to contribute, but because I didn't want to admit what was going on at home. The more Olivia pulled away, the more I convinced myself it wasn't a big deal. Then, one day, Jack mentioned that he and his wife were seeing a therapist for their money problems. I remember feeling a sharp pain in my chest, because deep down, I knew I should have been talking to someone too. But I didn't. I just nodded, pretending everything was fine. I was such a fool. That's when it all started to unravel. Olivia wasn't just pulling away from me. She was slipping away into something else entirely, and I was too blind to see it. Now, all I had was a gut feeling and a lot of unanswered questions. I needed to know the truth, no matter how badly it hurt. It hit me like a punch in the chest, the cold realization that I should have been talking to someone. I should have noticed, done something, but I didn't. I just kept pretending everything was fine. At home, I was an idiot for not seeing it sooner. Olivia had changed. And it wasn't just about the things she was buying or the secrecy with her phone. It was her entire attitude. She was always distracted, like she wasn't even there, even when she was physically in the room. Conversations became shallow. I'd ask how her day went, and she'd give me these one-word answers, barely registering what I said. She wasn't touching me anymore either. Not that I expected her to be all over me, but we used to be close, connected. Now it felt like she couldn't stand being near me. One night, I tried to initiate something, just a small touch, to get some kind of intimacy going again. She pulled away almost mechanically. "I'm tired," she said. But the way she said it, that tone, there was nothing affectionate about it. Just cold. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just tired. She was done. And here's the kicker. She wasn't done with life. No. She had plenty of energy for everything else. Her friends, her nights out, whatever else she was doing. It was just me she had no time for. I watched her get dressed to go out, looking like she was headed to a fancy club. Meanwhile, I was sitting there in my worn jeans and hoodie, wondering where the woman I married had gone. But the worst part? I ignored it. I kept telling myself it was just a phase. Maybe work was stressing her out. Maybe she was going through something. I even convinced myself that maybe I was the problem. Maybe I wasn't doing enough. Maybe I wasn't making her feel loved. So I tried harder. I helped more around the house. I planned little date nights. Nothing extravagant. Hell, we couldn't afford much. But no matter what I did, it was never enough. Then one day she came home with a new phone. I knew we couldn't afford it. I asked, half joking, "Did you rob a bank or something?" She just laughed it off and said, "It was a great deal." That was the moment I couldn't lie to myself anymore. That was when I knew something was seriously wrong. I started paying closer attention to everything. Her phone, her clothes, the way she carried herself. And it hit me. She wasn't the woman I married. She had changed and I had no idea why. But I was determined to figure it out. You know that feeling when something just doesn't add up? When everything in your gut is telling you something is wrong, even if you can't put your finger on it. That was me. A few weeks after I admitted to myself that Olivia wasn't who she used to be, I couldn't shake it. The changes in her behavior, the new things she kept buying, it all felt off. But I didn't have any proof. Just a feeling. A nagging, unsettling feeling that something was seriously wrong. Then it happened, the moment I couldn't ignore anymore. It was a Saturday morning. Olivia told me she was meeting Emma, one of her close friends, for coffee. On the surface, it sounded innocent enough, right? But something in her tone, the way she said it, felt off. Too casual, too quick. I didn't want to be that husband, the one who's always suspicious. But there was this unease I couldn't shake. Something had been gnawing at me ever since she brought that designer bag home. She told me it was a bargain, a knockoff from a sale, but the more I thought about it, the more that explanation didn't make sense. I don't know much about high-end fashion, but even I could tell that bag didn't look fake. It looked real, and real wasn't in our budget. I sat on the couch, staring at that damn bag. My mind kept racing. It's like I couldn't stop myself. I had to know. So I picked it up, turned it over, and started Googling ways to spot a fake designer bag. I checked the stitching, the logo, the zipper, all the little details. And then it hit me. This wasn't a knockoff. This was the real thing. A designer bag worth more than we had in savings. My stomach sank. A sick feeling settled in. She lied to me. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling, and tried to call her. My fingers fumbled as I dialed. My heart was hammering in my chest. She didn't pick up. Of course she didn't. I tried again. Nothing. Panic started creeping in. I was sweating, my mind racing. Where the hell was she? If she wasn't with Emma, then where? I called Emma. I don't know why. Maybe I thought she might cover for Olivia. But I had to know. When Emma picked up, she sounded casual, like everything was fine. "Hey, Emma," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You two still having coffee?" There was a long pause, long enough for my stomach to drop. "Coffee?" Emma replied, confused. "I'm at home, Ethan. I wasn't meeting Olivia today." Her words hit me like a punch. I gripped the phone so tight I thought I'd snap it. I could barely speak. I just muttered something about mixing up plans and hung up before she could ask any more questions. My mind was spinning. Where the hell was Olivia? Why was she lying to me? I sat there, staring at that damn bag for what felt like hours. I was furious, but more than that, I felt gutted. I didn't want to believe it. I tried to come up with some logical explanation, but deep down I knew something was off. And it wasn't just about the money. But I couldn't confront her yet. Not without more proof. I couldn't go in blind. I needed to be sure. So I played it cool. Well, as cool as I could. I had to gather more information before making any accusations. I needed to know everything, even if it ripped me apart in the process. I was a wreck. Every time my phone buzzed, I jumped, hoping it was Olivia. When she finally came home, it was late. She barely even looked at me, just dropped her bag on the couch and muttered that she was exhausted. No explanation for where she'd been. I didn't press her. Not yet. I wasn't ready. I just nodded, like the idiot I was, and let her go to bed without saying a word. But inside I was spiraling. I kept thinking back to when we first got married. I remembered how trusting I was, how we didn't have much, but we had each other, and that was enough. At least I thought it was. Now, everything felt like it was falling apart. I loved her. I trusted her. And now I didn't know what to think. Every little thing she did seemed wrong. That night, as I lay next to her, I couldn't sleep. My mind kept replaying everything. The lies, the excuses, the expensive things. Was this the same woman I married? Or had she been hiding this side of herself from me the whole time? The next morning, she came home with yet another new phone. Sleek, shiny, definitely something we couldn't afford. I stared at it like it was some kind of proof that I wasn't crazy. She noticed me staring and just shrugged. "Got it on a great deal," she said, like it was no big deal. I didn't say anything. Couldn't. My brain was screaming at me to ask, to demand answers. But I held back. I wasn't ready for that conversation yet. I needed more. I needed to be sure. So I decided to keep watching. I'd find out where she was going, who she was with. The old me would never have done this. Never would have snooped, doubted her like this. But I wasn't the same anymore. She made me this way. All my trust had evaporated, replaced by this gnawing feeling that I couldn't shake. I didn't know how far I was willing to go to find the truth, but I knew I couldn't stop. The lies, the secrecy, it was all building up. Couldn't ignore it. It was only a matter of time before everything came crashing down. The thought of confronting her made my stomach twist. But what else could I do? If I was going to catch her, I had to be smart, patient. But every day the doubt ate at me. The more I uncovered, the less I recognized the woman I thought I knew. So here I was spiraling. The lies, the strange behavior, the expensive stuff, it all kept piling up. And I couldn't shake the feeling that I was missing something huge. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but everything was pointing to Olivia hiding something. The problem was, I didn't have any real proof, just this gut feeling gnawing at me. Then late one night, I made up my mind. I was going to check her phone. She was asleep beside me, her phone lying on the nightstand. I felt like the worst kind of person for even considering it. But what else could I do? She'd lied to me too many times. The thing with Emma, that was the last straw. I reached over, my hand shaking, and grabbed her phone. As soon as the screen lit up, my heart stopped. The passcode was different. Definitely not the one I knew. My stomach sank. Why would she change it? There was only one reason for that. To keep me out. I set the phone back down, trying to hide how frustrated I was. If I confronted her now, she'd have an excuse. She always did. Instead, I decided to wait. I'd be patient. I had to figure out where she was really going, who she was meeting. A few days later, I got my chance.